From ring door cams to Cowboy Carter, we applaud Prince Harry and Meghan Markle for another contradiction-filled weekend. Look, I know we spend a lot of time reporting on what Prince Harry and Meghan Markle get wrong, but in the spirit of journalistic integrity, I think we have to acknowledge their wins too. Despite an investigation finding that Prince Harry's African Parks charity engaged in horrific abusive behavior, despite ring door cam footage surfacing of Prince Harry knocking on random doors, aimlessly looking for a friend in a country he says he doesn't trust or feel safe in, Harry and Meghan bravely, selflessly left their children, Archie and Lily, at home in Montecito after Prince Harry told the BBC that there were legitimate threats made against them to attend a Beyonce concert in Los Angeles this weekend. So let's take a moment to celebrate how courageous these two are. You are the most vulnerable member of the British royal family, but not too vulnerable for Texas Hold'em. Enough of that transparent PR stunt. Scott Rouse, who you loved, sent another expert our way. By the way, I just finished his video on Meghan and Jamie Kern Lima's interview. He hadn't posted it when he had done our interview, or I would have picked his brain about it. And it is fascinating. He talks about the way Meghan answers the question, are you going to stay married forever? And like a shrug on her face and the pitch of her voice. And he's like, I don't know if she believes that. It's amazing. So if you haven't seen that, you will enjoy it. But today we're discussing Prince Harry's startling BBC interview with clinical and forensic psychologist, Dr. G. The star of YouTube's Dr. G explains. If you heard the name before, it's because it's kind of a big deal, but it's also because Scott recommended him to us during our chat. He tells us when he sees a look of absolute disgust cross Prince Harry's face, and when he spots heightened stress and contempt, he explains that as well, which I think is really interesting. I do shuffle in this interview to find one of your questions and failed to in the moment, but later via email. I asked Dr. G this. Is Harry intentionally sabotaging things with his dad in fear of and anticipation of another parental loss? Perhaps if he is the one that destroys the relationship, then he can't unexpectedly lose another parent, his dad, because he takes control. So Dr. G responded, a very thoughtful response. It's going to take a second here. He says, that's a very psychologically insightful question, and I understand the logic behind it, particularly when considering unresolved grief and trauma from the loss of his mother. However, based on what I've observed, I think it's unlikely that Prince Harry is intentionally sabotaging his relationship with his father as a way to protect himself from the pain of potential loss. Instead, it appears more likely that he feels deeply justified in his actions, very possibly reinforced by the emotional feedback and validation he's receiving from those closest to him, such as his wife, Meghan Markle. In that context, his behavior may feel to him like an act of integrity. I know how ridiculous that sounds, rather than a self-protection push away. Rather than being driven by fear of loss, the disconnection may stem more from a sense of moral superiority or a belief that he's standing on principle. That framing, especially when reinforced or created by those closest to him, can make the familial rapture feel not just justified, but even virtuous. When someone has been convinced to think this way, reconciliation can feel like compromising one's values rather than healing a fractured bond. For more brilliant tidbits like that, here's my chat with Dr. G. Enjoy. Hi, all. Kinsey Schofield here, and I'm so excited to be with Dr. G. Dr. G, you are so brilliant. I've spent like the last 48 hours of my life. I know your face. Like I close my eyes and I see your face watching all your videos on YouTube. I love the way that you explain things. For my audience sake, you did a great video on Prince Harry this
Thank you.
week. And here are some of the words you used within the first like 30 seconds, shockingly:
Mhm.
contempt,
Mhm.
stress. You talk about the smiling and chuckling and the idea of performative. When we talk about this BBC interview, can you take me back to that
Mhm.
first few seconds of that video, and can we break that down, how you saw so many emotions within the first few seconds?
So contempt is one of the easiest emotions to see because most emotions that are authentic are both sides of the face. So when you smile, it's both sides, frown, both sides. Same for pretty much everything. So when you see the corner of the mouth go up, kind of like that, usually it's a flash. Sometimes people can hold it there. There really is no other good explanation than contempt. So immediately, as soon as the interview started, you see Harry do that. 2 seconds later, he does it again. So there must have been a lot of feelings right there. Anything we feel is going to express itself in our body in some way or another. It's just a matter of knowing how to decode it. So he's somebody who was not very stoic throughout this. He showed a lot of emotion actually.
Ooh, that's so interesting because over the last few weeks, his wife's done a lot of media, and you even talk about the shift in his posture or his facial
Mhm.
expressions when he talks about Meghan. But
Mhm.
in his wife's media, she's saying things like, "We're still in our honeymoon phase. I'm the happiest I've ever been." And then you watch Prince Harry's videos and you're like, there is no hiding that that person's not very content right now.
He looked very distressed throughout, particularly when talking about his family. That's what was so interesting about this interview is that what he was talking about through large parts of it were how concerned he is about safety and security and all of these things, but he didn't show any stress when talking about that. It was when he was talking about his family or talking about Meghan or talking about these various things. That's when you saw the emotions come up, when he thought that he was being treated unfairly because he wasn't given the security detail the same way everybody in the royal family typically would have. I don't know how to explain it, but in that issue that he had there, it was the unfairness that got him. It wasn't the idea that he's in danger, at least not from what I could see.
No, I love that. I love that you mentioned this because I wrote down while I was watching your video
Mhm.
that there is a shift in him when he's discussing people that aren't important as me get
Mhm.
security.
Mhm.
Like my initial thought there when you were talking about that shift in his posture, like he's stressing to the audience, do you realize that there are people that are less important than I am, that
Mhm.
get special treatment that I don't get? And I'm wondering, is this all, and you might not know this, but I'm asking for your instinct.
Sure.
Is he trying to convince people I need to sympathize with him? I should be on this guy's side because I cannot for the life of me understand why he did this interview.
I think so. That's what I at times when I talked about he would smile, it was to mask a lot. It's in other words to charm people. I think whether or not it came across that way, I think that was the attempt at least. And so I do think that when he would talk about these things, he would assume, and maybe he doesn't have a great perspective on some of these things, but he would assume, of course, if I say this, people are going to see my perspective. They're going to side with me. He may be a little bit lost in there. He may not fully understand how people are going to take some of what he said, but I think that he assumed that if I get this message out there, people are going to agree with me. They're going to see why would I be treated this way? It's everybody else's fault that I'm being treated like this.
What a bubble to live in, because I could understand it if he, this is me getting my royal commentator hat on. I apologize. I could understand it if he had spent the last 5 years working for charities
Mhm.
and had some tangible things he could tell us about. For the last 5 years, I did this in Africa, or I
Mhm.
did but it's for the last 5 years, I sold a book about my family's secrets, and I have been kicked off. Basically, I had to step down from a charity board because the CEO says that I was causing problems or something, something to that effect. I've done multiple reality shows, multiple podcasts. There has been a real lack of contribution to
Mhm.
this life of 35 years, life of service that he tells us about
Mhm.
in the interview, which also like he's 40 years old, dude. Like
Yeah.
35 is
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
exactly were you doing at 5 years
Right.
old?
Yeah.
Um, but it's like I just don't think he lives in the same world that we do. I think that he really believes himself.
Well, something that I think may lend itself to that is, and this is just my perspective, just my opinion, but Meghan Markle doesn't seem to be very authentic. I think there's probably a lot of people that can agree with that statement. And when you're with somebody who doesn't come across as authentic, at least out in the public eye. I've never seen her seeming particularly authentic. And I think that when you're around that, you become a little bit of that as well. He comes across very differently than she does. But as you were referring to, that she's talking about, we're still in our honeymoon phase and whatever, she does have this air of inauthenticity. And I think when if that's who you're around 90% of your day, that affects you, I think.
That is such a good point. All right. So I love when you talk about the look of disgust when he says he can forgive the press, because he's mentioning everyone. I can forgive my father. I can forgive my brother. I can forgive my stepmother. And he's
Yeah.
like, I can even forgive the press. But there's like a legitimate change on
Yeah.
his face when he says, and it's also ironic because he's talking to the press
Yeah.
while he
It is.
says this.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts when you saw that?
It's such a specific look. It couldn't be anything other than disgust. And him saying that goes back to the performance idea. I guess he thought I should say this. This is something maybe that will go over well, but he couldn't hold it in because you wrinkle your nose, your mouth goes down. It's if you see something disgusting, your face automatically does that. There's several expressions that our face just does, like when we're shocked, like our eyes open, our mouth opens. When we have fear, our corners of our mouth goes down. Disgust is a very distinct look, and he clearly was very disgusted when he was talking about the idea of forgiving the press.
That is wild. Can I ask you about the performative smile you say that you see when he talks about being married to Meghan? I'm wondering if that performative, because when I was listening to you discuss it, I thought,
Mhm.
is this performative smile because he knows that the royal family doesn't like her, or he knows the press doesn't like her? What is the performative smile about there?
I would think it's the population at large that he's talking to at this point.
Mm,
That's what I think. That's what the purpose of this interview was. Is that it was to garner maybe sympathy or for have people to charm people into seeing things his way. So I do think it was interesting. If you watch, he'll go from smiling, doing this big smile, to immediately talking about something else, and it goes away immediately. So you know it's not a very authentic feeling, but he wants people to see that he thinks something. I'm trying to remember specifically what he said, but there was something that I think he wanted to come across that people were being frivolous about something or that it wasn't that important. So he smiles when he's talking about it. So I do think it was an effort because, well, let me explain it this way. When we see people smile that we like, we tend to smile back. So
yeah.
it's not unusual at all that we do that in order to charm people, in order to get them to agree with us, to feel a certain way. So I think that there were certain parts that he definitely wanted to say. He went in there saying, I'm going to say this, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say this. So I think at times he would do that. Or when I talk about Meghan, I'm going to do this because I want people to have this impression. So it's impression management, in my
Mm.
opinion.
Oh, how interesting. Does it say anything to you at all that he promised the BBC 10 minutes? These two are typically very
Hmm.
controlling of the press,
Hmm.
yet he gave them 30 minutes. Does that say to you that he wanted to reiterate so much what he had to say? Because he does repeat himself a couple of times about security. At the end of the day, this is just about security. Does it say, this has really been building up inside him? That's why he sat there for 30 minutes and unleashed. Does that give you any sort of idea of what's going on inside?
So my impression was that security felt like a safe thing to talk about because it
Mm.
somehow it's less uh, emotionally charged, maybe, or it's a different subject than talking specifically about his family in another context. So I think that there's probably a lot that he wants to say. So he was taking that time to say it. He was doing it through the guise about the security. I don't think that's really what a lot of it was about. And on top of that, he seemed a bit overwhelmed and disorganized throughout this. So he may have lost track of time. He
Mm.
really seemed, and I haven't seen every interview he's ever done, but he seemed more disjointed in this than I think he typically is.
Yeah, because there is a moment where he says, my wife and I, and then he glitches. And
Hmm.
I don't know if right there he's stopping because he goes, I don't know if she wants me to say this, so I better not say it. I totally agree with you when you talk about the disjointedness and
Hmm.
how sometimes it's over here and oh nope, he gets it right back on this route. That's so interesting because you would imagine in such a big moment like this, because historians are saying this is going to go in the history books, this
Hmm.
interview,
Hmm.
as potentially what was the nail in the coffin for his relationship with the British royal family.
Sure.
So you think he would want it to be more structured. And when you say security is really the blanket, the safe
Hmm.
space,
Hmm.
are you saying that this was also a way for him to say, I want reconciliation with my, like maybe he wanted to bring up the royal family too?
I think he was what I took away from it. It sounded like he was blaming the royal family pretty
Yes,
directly at times.
I
So,
do.
yeah. I think that's what he wants people to hear is like there's space here, but it's not my fault. It's
Yeah.
if I recall uh, correctly, he said something. He basically blamed King Charles specifically for saying that he could fix this, but he isn't doing it. That's a
Mhm.
paraphrase of what he said, but it was he was very direct about the fact that he's essentially blaming his family. So I think that saying it's their fault that these security issues are here, I think that's really a way to say that it's their fault that things are as broken as they are, or something like that. I don't
And
think
so
he's accepting
why say the
responsibility.
reconciliation thing to save yourself so you don't look like a jerk? Why do you say that then? Because that was I don't know if you noticed this,
Hmm.
but from the American media
Yeah,
standpoint, that was the big every interview I did after that was Harry wants a reconciliation. And I'm like, I actually don't think he does.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's hard to know what conversations he's been having, maybe at home or elsewhere, that are saying like, they need to come to you. You don't need to reconcile with them. It's their fault that all this is happening. Like, you don't have any responsibility here. Things like that. So yeah, it didn't seem conciliatory at all to me. It seemed, uh, I was surprisingly direct at how angry he seemed at his family, actually. So.
I'm really glad you brought that up. Okay, so I want to. I don't know how much you know about the security issue, but
Mhm.
having watched that interview, I feel like a lot of people that aren't necessarily heavily invested
Yeah,
feel like Prince Harry has lost his security. But the reality is, Prince Harry just has to give Ravik, the
yeah.
council that
Hmm.
determines his security, 28 days notice, and 9 out of 10 times I've seen that he does get the full on armed
Sure.
guards, police
Yeah,
protection.
yeah,
And it is based on what he's coming to the UK for. So if he's doing something frivolous, like coming to go shooting with his friends, or
yeah.
Meghan wants to go Christmas shopping, I highly doubt they're going to get the full, the
Sure.
all the bells and whistles. But
Yeah.
if he is coming to represent a charity that's associated with the British royal family, or if he's coming to represent the king in any way, or to support the king, I understand that he gets it. Did you feel like the way that he tells the story is that he's been abandoned?
That's the if you're not familiar with that background, you watch that interview, that's what it's going to sound like. That's what it sounded like to me because I didn't know all the ins and outs. I've been corrected on some of them since then. So I'm finding out a lot more about the specifics about that. But the way that this comes across is, yeah, like I have no security. Like they're doing nothing for me. Not I have to let them know I have to plan a month ahead of time to get full security. So yeah, it's interesting how he framed it. So for anybody who's uninitiated in that way, they're going to come away thinking that he's been abandoned by the royal family and they're refusing to provide him any security. At least that's what it sounded like to me when I watched it.
Right. And so Scott Rouse, our mutual
Hmm.
friend, in my interview with him, he stopped short of saying something psychological is going on. He told me that you were the expert. What is your observation on his state of mind? And our audience knows you're not
Yeah,
working with him directly, but
right.
when you watch that, were there any concerns?
So yeah, so these are just my opinions about what's going on. But he, as I said, he seemed very disjointed when they would talk about certain things. He would and ah a whole lot for somebody who's in the public eye, who's able to speak well or typically able to speak well. It was unusual to see that many ums and ahs, blinking constantly, seeming to lose his train of thought, pausing at times to have to look down and think. To me, I'm not. This is obviously I'm not diagnosing him with anything, but he did act like somebody that's dealing with trauma. Actually, that's what I see a lot when I'm with somebody in therapy. We can be talking about relatively normal things. Then when we go back to talking about something that's adjacent to or about something traumatic, that's what it starts to look like when they start talking about things that are deeply hard for them, that are deeply challenging. So I did see somebody who looked like they were really struggling, who, and I believe, if I understand right, he has a history of anxiety, so it's not maybe entirely shocking. Um,
Yeah.
but given his history, that it would make a lot of sense. But I did see somebody who looked like they were very much struggling in that realm.
How does somebody process that? How does somebody push through that? Does it require, if in his mind it
Mhm.
requires his family coming to him and apologizing, would a counselor even recommend that? I mean, what are next steps if you want to get beyond this? And when you talk about trauma, could
Mhm.
it be the death of his mother, Princess Diana, at a young age? Could it be just the bizarre experience of being a member of the British royal family? Or is there real trauma? Because he mentions 2020 when they
Mhm.
decided to step back. Is there actual trauma associated with him leaving the royal family, because he records himself on his Netflix show like, we're on our freedom flight, we're jumping
Yeah.
on Tyler Perry's jet, we're never
Yeah.
coming back, basically. And
Right.
he's like excited about leaving the royal family.
So think about it like this. I think that there's probably pieces of everything you just said that are part of it. But if you lose your mother, I think he was 12 years old when he lost his mother,
Yeah, he
I
was
believe.
young. Yeah, I think he
Yeah,
was
he was young.
12.
Yeah. So at 12 years old, losing your mother, which is literally in the grand scheme of things, one of the most traumatic things you can go through. Not having a mother who's adequate or losing your mother. There's just something so deeply traumatic about something like that, particularly as a child. So dealing with that trauma and then dealing with trauma of whether or not he really chose to leave his family. Like maybe it was his idea, I don't know. Or if he felt pressured to leave his family, losing the rest of his family again, that could be much more traumatic for somebody who lost their mother than just your average person who is estranged from their family, or there's been a fight and they've left and they've said, okay, like I'm done with them, I don't want to deal with them anymore, versus someone who lost their mother and then maybe felt pressured to leave their family. I don't know if he was or not, but if he was, absolutely there could be a lot of confusion and overwhelm when it comes to that. So absolutely there could be trauma
Well,
related
he
specifically to that.
does make it sound like he was pressured to leave the family,
Hmm.
but I also wonder how much pressure actually came from Meghan, who is notoriously not close to her family. So
Hmm.
not having a brother or a sister to call when you're having a bad day is normal for her.
Sure.
Whereas Prince Harry grew up all of his life being able to pick up the phone and say, William, this just happened. What do I do?
Hmm.
And now he can't do that anymore.
Absolutely. I mean, anxiety is about predictability. So the more predictable the world is, the less anxious we feel. He went through something as a child that was completely unpredictable, completely
Wow.
turns your life upside down. So then if there are other things that feel unpredictable to him or feel out of his control, that is going to bring those feelings back again. So you get, as weird as it sounds, you get re-traumatized by these things. So 2020 could be very re-traumatizing in a lot of ways. So as he talks about this, talking about security detail, shows no emotion. Not a big deal because I don't think he's really afraid of that. As soon as he starts talking about his father or starts talking about the royal family, it just gets overwhelming. He just can't seem to get through it very, very clearly. So yeah, I think that what we're seeing is someone who is very likely, uh, potentially re-traumatized with these things. Like I said, not a diagnosis; it's just my opinion. But
Right.
yeah,
Well, what are next steps, and does the royal family have to be involved? Can the royal can Prince Harry and you could say, oh my gosh, that's so silly to ever say somebody could overcome this trauma. Maybe that's not even an option. And I'm just too much of a glass half full kind of gal. But if your objective is to overcome, can you do it without the royal family's involvement? Can he do this on his own and work his way out of these feelings he has towards them?
if he's surrounded by healthy people, potentially, so that
Mm.
all has to do with the health of the people around him. If his wife is very healthy and they've got a great relationship and she's supportive in healthy ways, he's got a good shot of being able to sort through a lot of this. If she isn't, it's going to make it infinitely more difficult. So yes, people can recover from most issues if they know how to address them and they have healthy people around them that can help support them. But if they don't, or if they have toxic people, or if there's people that have their own issues that are playing out in your life, then you're probably going to continue to struggle.
Oof. That's really good advice. Thank you for that. I know some people are sitting back going, "Whoa, that hit home." Well, when you look at Prince Harry, this decision to speak out, and I'm with you, I felt like it was a bit of a finger pointing at the British royal family from a perspective of healing things. Do
Mhm.
you think that this likely set how do you feel like the royal family is going to react to something like that? Did it set all this time heals all wounds in the last few years since the book came out? Did it reset that? So now we got to start all over and wait.
I believe if I was, and they may not think like I do,
If
but if
you were
I
a
was,
king,
yeah, exactly right. But if I was a family member and I was on the receiving end of that, I would think he's learned nothing. Like we've made no progress. There's nothing I can do that's going to change this. This is just how it's going to be. So I think it would be a reaffirmation that things aren't getting better and that he's not coming to the table in a real way to own whatever part he has to try to reconcile things. It just to me would be more of the same, probably.
yeah, I agree with you. Do you think that that interview was therapeutic for him? Might Prince Harry actually consider what he did something he needed to do?
maybe not the healthiest thing. It may have been therapeutic for him in a sense, but I don't think the outcome was one that was healthy necessarily. I don't think it's going to repair anything. So he may have said some things he wanted to say. There could have been elements of that were therapeutic for him, but that doesn't mean it was a good interview to do.
I know. I
Yeah.
know. That's how I feel too.
Yeah.
I did want to ask you
Yeah.
specifically about him saying he didn't know how much longer his father had to live.
Mhm.
To me, I would never say that about my father's not the king, but he does have a high, he's I would never want to do anything that would put his authority in jeopardy. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
Mhm.
And I just feel like it's common sense and it's not nice, it's rude. I can't tell if that comment is just a throwaway comment. Like, definitely, I feel like something that's been said around his kitchen table with Meghan before. Well, I don't know how much longer he has to live. And I just don't know why he would put that out into the universe on such an international scale.
It's to me, I think that goes back to the idea that this interview maybe wasn't as clean as he may have thought it was going to be in his mind. The things came out, he said things off the cuff that maybe he wouldn't have otherwise said because I think his thought process was maybe a little bit muddled. So, yeah, I do think things slipped out probably in ways that he wouldn't have wanted them to. That I see how you took it that way. I take it the same way. So I don't think that that was part that he probably intended to say, and I don't think it came across very well.
I'm glad that you agree. All right. You've kind of already answered this, but I'll just ask you,
Yeah.
just to summarize, why do
Mhm.
you think Prince Harry did this interview?
Yeah, well, I think the basic reason I think is that he's trying to air grievances and make people see, well, it's the royal family's fault that there's issues here, not mine. And so that's what I think it was. I don't think it was a really strong attempt to reconcile anything. I think it was to make sure that people understand his side of the story, which is this isn't my fault. King Charles could fix this, and he's not doing it, and so on and so forth. So I think it was really trying to place blame elsewhere.
And do you really think that he thinks by doing something like this, the prime minister is going to insert himself in it and change any sort of protocol for Prince Harry?
He may have thought that, sometimes people get bad ideas, like maybe he just didn't think through it very well or
Well,
had it in.
can I interrupt you
Yeah.
just for a second to
Yeah.
tell you
Yeah.
the only reason why I think he really does is
Yeah.
because when they had an issue in New York with
Yeah.
uh what Harry called a near catastrophic high-speed car chase, and
Hmm.
we actually the mayor of New York came out and said that's not true. The
Yeah.
NYPD came out and said that's not true.
Yeah.
Harry wrote the NYPD because he was trying to use this story as proof that he needed this security with Ravik in the middle of this court case.
Yeah.
And he threatened the NYPD with Gavin Newsom, the California governor,
Sure.
who he's
Yeah.
become friends with.
Hmm.
So I actually, when he does say the thing about the prime minister, I'm like, I think he's completely serious. I
Yeah,
think
he
he
might
really,
be.
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. It's there are times where I think that he doesn't maybe have isn't fully grounded in reality about certain things, right? Just like I said, like the idea that this interview was going to somehow work in his favor. I think that he probably thought about it some, and it just I don't think it's going to play out the way that he hopes or thinks it will. But he also, I did want to say there are a couple of things that really stood out to me in the interview that I just thought were odd. And I
Yeah.
talk about this in my video actually. That at one point when he's talking about that he can't take his children to the UK, or I basically I can't go to the UK with my kids. They'll never see my homeland, and it fascinates me because Prince Archie was born in the UK as well, so it's his homeland too. So he's separating his kids as though like they're from somewhere else. They're not part of this. Isn't their homeland. I just find that such an odd way to frame things, and it speaks to me to how I don't think that was accidental. I think he's trying to get across like uh, you know my children and my wife are not part of this. Like they are not going to be part of this family or something. It felt passive aggressive in a sense to frame it that way. So I don't know if it stood out to you at all, but I thought it was strange.
It did stand out to me. And my initial instinct was that he is trying to say we're our own unit.
Hmm.
But he does talk about this, how the royal family uses this security as leverage to trap you in this
Hmm.
system.
Hmm.
But if this is a prison, which he
Hmm.
also said in the Oprah Winfrey interview, my father and my brother are trapped. If this is such a prison, why do you insist that your children have titles? Why is it Prince Archie? Why is it
Hmm.
Princess Lily?
Yeah.
Because you're telling us regular people that you've escaped some horrible place that are basically blackmailing you if you want to be feel safe for the rest of your life. But then you give your children these American babies that like don't actually have to have anything to do with that titles, and now they're posting them online too. That's another thing that I just Harry campaigns to keep children off of social media because the social media companies don't take accountability for what happens.
Yeah.
Harry says his family is in jeopardy, specifically his children, in that interview, and Meghan's posting pictures of them on the internet. Keep them away from the world. Any little inch you give weirdos, they'll take. You know
Mhm.
what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, it's there's probably a lot more to be said about Meghan Markle, but watching her, I watched just bits. I watched some bits of her Netflix thing, whatever you want to call it. I watched some bits of it online because I'm not going to watch the whole thing, but it does show how disconnected they are from the rest of the world, I think, because it's really ridiculous. Um, at least the bits that I watched, it just felt so out of touch. So I just wonder, are they, they want things both ways. They want to be famous, but they don't. They want to be regular people, and they're not. It's. I think they're just. It comes across like they're very confused in a lot of ways.
I know it does come across that way. And if you want privacy, which Meghan said to Oprah Winfrey, everybody's owed the basic right of privacy,
Mhm.
then I think people would give it to them. Actually, there was a very high profile photographer, paparazzo,
Yeah,
that says their pictures aren't even are not what worth what they used to be worth. So I don't even
sure.
bother with them anymore. So
Yeah,
like I think there's analytics that prove they're not as
yeah.
popular or worth valuable to the media as much as they used to be. So I do think that if they really wanted to have this blissful life away from the world where they can freeze flower petals in
Mhm.
their water and sprinkle flower petals on absolutely every meal, like nobody's going to know and nobody's going to judge or care. But
Right.
it does seem like how bizarre to be in this for Prince Harry when you were talking about his anxiety. And that really hit home for me because I'm an anxious person. And you're
Mhm.
absolutely right that as long as I know what's happening within the next 24 hours, I'm
Yeah,
cool. But when
yeah,
I wake up and my phone's blowing up and it's like, I'm like, oh my gosh,
yeah.
panicking. So how bizarre must it be for Prince Harry, who clearly does want a private life, does not like galas, doesn't like big events, to have this wife that is pursuing fame with a vengeance.
And so another piece of anxiety is the ability to escape. He's talked about being agoraphobic, I believe. I don't want to I
Mm-hmm.
can't quote that, but I'm pretty sure he said that he had agoraphobia at one point, which is where you don't want to leave the house or you stay within certain areas because it makes you anxious to leave. And so a big part of what happens when people get really anxious is they get stuck in fight or flight. And flight, it actually goes freeze and then flight and then fight. That's the order. So in other words, if you think of it like if you saw a wild animal, the first thing you're going to do is stop. The second thing you're going to do is try to get out of there, and if you have to, you're going to fight. Okay, so this is what anxiety triggers in people, and flight is oftentimes the place that most people go to. But if the idea of being surrounded by people, going to galas, doing all this stuff, triggers that flight response, and you can't escape it, it's going to make you really unhappy and really anxious. And so I don't know how he feels day to day, but if these are things he wants to avoid and he can't because this is his relationship, he can't call his family and vent, there could be a lot of challenges here. This could be very, very challenging to be stuck in a situation like that.
And then if he is, and I know that both you and Scott have said like the way that he delivers the lines about security does
Mhm.
not, he's comfortable when he talks about it. He's not
Seems
as
to be.
anxious as you
Yeah.
would imagine.
Right.
But if he I wonder if the security thing is just kind of like the thing he says about just the chaos.
Yep.
It's security, because
Mhm.
now I don't feel comfortable going to all these places. Oh, I don't
Right.
think you were comfortable going to all those places to begin with.
Right.
But I
Yeah.
also wonder if he is concerned about security, and they do have a lot of money, he can pay for the best security in the world. But
Sure.
if he really is concerned about security, that just kind of heightens all of these other emotions.
Sure. If he was actually concerned about he thinks somebody's going to try to harm him or any of that kind of stuff, absolutely, that would certainly contribute to it. But nothing about his emotional expression when he talks about those things would suggest that that's something that's on his mind. those were the cleanest parts that came out of when he talked, was when he was talking about that stuff. Because that, if you think about the way the brain works, there's an intellectual side of the brain and there's an emotional side. They're separate. They're different parts of the brain. One's very primitive, the other's a lot more advanced. You're either in one, more of one or the other. So when you're very emotional, you can't access the logical part. You can't speak as well. So if we were talking and there was, I'll go back to the wild animal example. If there's a wild animal outside, I'm not going to be able to talk like this because I won't be able to access the logical part of my brain. I'll just be worried. So when you have somebody that is doing an interview like he was, if there are things that make him anxious, he's going to have a harder time getting them out. That's why when I talk about there being trauma, he kind of stutters over his words and things like that. But when he's talking about security and all that, it's very clean, it's very direct, he's very logical, he can access whatever he needs to. So to me, that doesn't make him anxious. That's not something that he's actively worried about. You can watch interviews with people that that do have anxiety about certain things or are worried about their lives being threatened, and you can compare that to this, and it looks incredibly different.
Oh, no, yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think one thing that if he heard me ever talk, the one thing that I wish he would hear is that no one wants any harm to come to them.
No.
I hope that they continue to stay safe. I want their babies to live blissfully,
Mhm.
safe, carefree.
Absolutely.
Um, but I do think that the public in general is having a hard time listening to somebody that has such a blessed life complain. I mean, I know that the Santa Barbara Police Department show up at their house within seconds every time the alarm goes off. Like there were reports of like 3 times in a week one year. So I know that they have incredible security here in the States. I do think I just wish that, and I don't know, I think that the public would be more tolerable towards him if he would just act a little more grateful. But at the same time, then we have Meghan Markle who's like, I'm honeymoon phase. I love my life. And we're all like, just chill. So maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe.
Well, no, it's funny though when you talk about Megan like that, is that humans are really good, whether we can explain it or not. We're really good at sniffing out inauthenticity. So when we see somebody who's being fake, we know it. Like as a body language expert, I can tell you why. I can say because this, and this is what you're seeing. You might not be able to do that, but you'll know they're being unauthentic. You can feel it. So it seems to be near universal that people look at Meghan Markle and say she is not authentic. Like
Yeah.
there's something about the way that she expresses things that just doesn't feel real or feel like it's rooted in real feelings or any of that stuff. So it's very interesting.
Well, did you have any other reactions to the video? I mean, when you turned it off and you sat back, what did you think? Well, worst thing he's done lately, or did you have any initial just thoughts, or did you go, I feel sorry for that guy? Like, what was just in your head?
My feeling afterward, I actually felt bad for him afterwards, even though
Mm,
I thought that there was a lot that was self-inflicted in that video, I think. So in that sense, I don't feel bad for him in that way, but it feels like he wants to connect with his family, but just is not going to take the steps to do it. He's not going to be able to do it. And,
does it also feel like he wants to connect with his family, but he has so many gripes that it's he doesn't want to connect with his family for the right or the appropriate way. Like I want my dad won't
yeah,
talk to me. I totally got that. But I
yeah.
also felt like maybe your dad doesn't want to talk to you because you are like a thorn in his side when you want
Mhm.
to talk to him.
Family dynamics are so complicated and so messy. And I mean, as a therapist, that's part of what I do. I deal with working with families and I see how messy it is. And I know how hard it can be for people to have insight into their own behavior and see sometimes the harm that they're causing. They just don't get it. Sometimes they may be hurting the whole family and have no idea. So I feel bad for him in the sense that I think he may be getting some bad advice. Like I think that
Yes.
some people may be telling him things that are not helpful. And in that sense, I feel bad for him. But I do think that any of the issues that would arise from him after this interview are self-inflicted. I don't think that he came across as sympathetic in that way. I didn't feel bad for him because his family's not providing him, or that the decisions haven't been made to give him the same security detail he previously had. But it just in the sense of the connection with family, I did feel for him in that sense. There was something about that that felt hurtful, and that he does seem to be struggling with that. It's always hard for me to watch somebody struggle, and he seemed to be struggling in that interview.
Would he have a hard, or would he have an easier time understanding if he but did more due diligence, in the sense that I think that he doesn't understand what his father's role is. And,
Mhm.
a lot of people that work are like, he's suing his father's government.
Yeah.
His father could make the mistake of saying something to him that Harry then repeated in court that would blow everything up.
Mhm.
Um, Sometimes I think with both Harry, I feel like Meghan, I don't think anything racial went on with Meghan Markle. And I think that what happened was Meghan felt rejected because she was an American with sharp elbows, and she
Mhm.
bulldozed her way in there and
Yeah.
wanted to make changes immediately. And everybody was like, girlfriend, you need to pump the brakes.
Yeah.
Catherine dated William for 10 years
Mhm.
before they started to phase her in.
Yeah.
And then she sat quietly. And then, she just she earned everyone's trust.
Yeah.
And I do think a lot of Harry and Meghan's problem is this lack of patience and this lack of due diligence. I mean, even with Meghan's brands, she's had to change multiple brand names because somebody else already had them.
Yeah.
If Harry just understood what his father's role ultimately meant and what his actions, the consequences they would have on his father, maybe he A, wouldn't pursue them, and B, maybe he would understand why his dad hesitates to engage.
Well, and there comes that lack of insight, is that sometimes there can be so many feelings about all of it that he can't access the logical part of his brain that really understands all those things. Or maybe not can't, but doesn't. Maybe he needs to reflect on that more or have somebody that can help him see that. Therein lies who we're surrounded by has such a huge impact on it, on us and the way we think about things. As humans, we're creatures that are meant to interact with each other. We're not meant to just figure everything out on our own. So hopefully we surround ourselves with healthy people that can help us clarify things. Hey, I'm having an issue with my family. Talk through it with somebody, walk out feeling a little wiser about it. Or when people come to therapy, that's part of why therapy works, is it's an interaction. And so if Meghan Markle, for example, is not a good sounding board, then it's not going to help him resolve these things. It's going to just deepen the problem. And so regardless of, I don't know what their relationship is ultimately like behind closed doors. Maybe it's great, maybe there's challenges, but
You
if
know
there
that
are
there are flour sprinkles on his
yeah,
pancakes.
that's true. So um but if she is not a good sounding board for somebody that understands and respects the royal family and understands and can help him process that, if she's just like, ugh, don't deal with that stuff, you shouldn't have to deal with that, that's totally going to color how he sees things. So yeah,
Mm.
he may lack the insight to really understand the impact he has on his family or about his father and all of those things.
Do you agree with us? Disagree with us? Let us know in the comments below. Dr. G, tell us how we can follow you for the rest of our lives.
So you can find me on YouTube at Dr. G Explains. That's my channel. I cover true crime, politicians, covering some of the royal family. I do all sorts of stuff related to body language, psychology, all sorts of interesting things. So yeah, YouTube is the best place to find me.
And such a soothing voice. All right, why
Thank you.
didn't you go into radio?
Well, I narrate for the Law and Crime Network as well. So I
Nice.
do their interrogation videos and some other stuff. So I do a little bit of that.
Dr. G, what a G you are. You're
Thank
a
you.
gangster, and I really appreciate your time today. So I hope you'll come back again soon once Harry and Meghan give us some wild new footage, which is just, probably a few hours
Right.
away, knowing these two.
Anytime I will come back here anytime you want.
Wow, that was fascinating. Agree with us, disagree with us. Let us know in the comments below. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. And a friendly reminder, I know I shouldn't have to tell you this, but Dr. G has not worked with Prince Harry. These are all just his observations. And maybe Prince Harry should give him a call. I don't know.